welcome to the tent, and welcome. This discussion will take place between me and His Excellency Pascal Hector, German Ambassador to Denmark, and welcome to Mariager. And I've really been looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you for inviting me.
And today, I think it's the first most relevant thing to discuss is, of course, the Danish and German relations, since we are in Denmark. And it's a relation that, of course, is historical, goes way back, and also because of our geographical location. But then also recently, we've heard movements from the Danish government expressing that some of our closest partners are indeed the United States, for example. So maybe if you could explain to us how do you see the German and Danish relation now and in the future, and where is it going to be in the future?
Yes, so first of all, as I said, thank you very much for inviting me and for being able to speak here on this topic. And you said it's the first and most interesting thing at the moment, and you are probably more right to that than you know. Because in fact, as you might know, yesterday our foreign minister, Mrs. Annalena Baerbock, she was in Copenhagen. She had a bilateral visit here and met Monsieur Kofod, and they both signed a German-Danish plan of action. So this is a very precise work program that we'll have over the next several years, where you have all the programs that are a program for all the activities that are being done. It's not exclusive, there can be other activities, but there are lots of them in there. I will not go through it, of course, that would lead too far, but that shows that it is really an important moment. And the relation between Denmark and Germany is so important because for Denmark, Germany is the only country which has a land border with Denmark. Obviously, you have the bridge towards Sweden, but that's just a bridge. But besides, the only country with a land border, so it's Germany. And that leads to a very close contact, obviously. We also have the minorities on both sides. There, lots of important things have happened over the last year, because there was, for the first time since the 50s, a member of the Danish minority in Germany that has been elected to the Bundestag. And now we also have, for the first time, a Danish person, Mr. Madsen, who was the mayor of Rostock before already, and now he is the first minister in a German government, in the government of the Land of Schleswig-Holstein. He's the economic minister, and he's a Dane. So we have a member of parliament, Danish member of parliament. We have a minister in a regional government, and on the other side we have, for the first time also since a long time, the mayor of one of the municipalities in Sønderjylland, Tønder, which is also not also, but on the other hand, a member of the German minority in Sønderjylland. So this shows how intense this cooperation is, and well, we can come back to different things, but for the moment I will leave it with that.
Yes, thank you. So it indeed shows that the close ties are not just political, but also cultural, of course, because of our borders and our shared history. I'm really curious actually to know more about this German-Danish work program. Maybe if you could share with some key highlights for the next few years, since it's very new and just has broken into the media.
Yes, so it should break into the media, and in fact yesterday we made the two ministers made a press conference and presented it. There was a sign ceremony, it was public. So there are many areas and many concrete programs in it. And perhaps I will take one area out of it because it's one of the most important ones. That is the energy cooperation between Germany and Denmark. especially as concerns the wind energy. As you may know, we had this summit in Esbjerg, which was on the 18th of May, between Denmark, Germany, the Netherlands, and Belgium, with the participation of the President of the European Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen. So the Chancellor had been there, our Chancellor, of course, the State Minister had been there. The decision was taken and the plan was set up to expand the use of wind energy in the North Sea to double it, so meaning 4 times more than we have today until 2030, and to 10 times more than today until 2050. So this is a very substantial amount, with 150 gigawatt installed capacity as a goal until 2050, which would alone as such cover the electric consumption of all the households in the whole European Union by 2050. So that's quite substantial. It's only households and the other needs, but it's also only the North Sea. And now on Bornholm, on next Tuesday, so in 3 days' time, the 30th, we'll have a similar summit Bornholm on the Baltic Sea energy cooperation. So what we did for the North Sea in Esbjerg will be repeated for the Baltic Sea, of course with other participants except for Denmark and Germany, because we are the only ones that are as well in the North Sea and in the Baltic Sea. There it will be the Baltic Sea countries, like for instance Poland, the 3 Baltic countries, Sweden, Finland, and of course Denmark and Germany. So for Germany, unfortunately, the Chancellor cannot come personally because we have a government retreat on that day, but there will be, of course, a German representative, and there will be signed a comparable action plan. There it's 90 gigawatt as a construction goal until 2050, a little bit less than in the North Sea, but still a substantial amount. If you think that 150 are covering the needs of all the households in Europe already, then the 90 is a nice addition to that. And if you take into account all the other areas in Europe where you can have renewable energies, like for instance solar energy in the south, then you see that the grønne omstilling, as you say here, the green transition is working and is well underway. Of course, it takes some time. It's not until 2050 that it's really that these figures I was talking about can be reached, but it's underway, and that's the important thing. I mean, 1 generation, 30 years, a little bit less, but it's not so much by standards of transforming the whole energy production system of the whole continent.
Yeah, and so as indeed there is progress taking place, there are many agreements being made at the moment, and this is also on the background, the very tragic background, of course, of the conflict and the war in Ukraine. Maybe if you would like to share some thoughts about the relation to the German energy policy, especially when it comes to Nord Stream 2. Which was in the beginning of the project, of course, seen as an entirely private project, but now, more recently, its confirmation was suspended by the government. So how do these geopolitical shifts relate to how you're expanding, for example, wind energy investments, for example, in Denmark, and how will that look into the future?
Yes. So I'm coming to it in a more extensive way, but I would say beforehand, the good news is that the 2 developments becoming independent energy-wise from Russia and realizing the green transition are concurrent. They are going in the same direction. So in fact, the new development or the development concerning Russia, as sad as it is speeding up very much the green transition, and that's the good side effect. But perhaps I would like to come back a little bit more in detail on this terrible war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, because it's such a fundamental event. 24th of February this year. So I think it's really a moment where you have a cut in history, like you have these defining moments which end certain political periods, like you had in Sarajevo, things like that, the shooting of Sarajevo in 1914 and the fall of the Berlin Wall as a good example in 1989. So I'm sure that if you look back, if you will look back in 100 years' time on our time, people will say that this was a defining moment of history and that it changed an epoch from one epoch to another. The epoch of unlimited globalization from 1990, let's say, until 2022, and now starts a new period, which of course we do not know how it will develop, so we cannot find a suitable name for it. But what we know already now is that it is a fundamentally unlawful war of aggression of one country towards another. It's a breach of civilization and the really bad thing about it is that it brings back an approach to international relations that we thought was overcome, that we didn't have it anymore. And let me explain this idea, because it's a very, very important idea for international relations. So there are basically two different approaches to international relations. The one is power politics, meaning that the powerful can realize his will, even against the wishes of the less powerful, simply because he can do so. This is the idea of international relations that you had through the whole history until 1945, let's say, from the Roman times until the Second World War. The idea in 1945 with the Charter of the United Nations was to end once and for all this approach to international law and to replace it by the second one, which is the rules-based international relations. So the idea was that power politics is something that is the way international relations have been conducted in the past, and that the rules-based international relations is how international relations are to be conducted today from 1945, the entry into force of the Charter of the United Nations onwards. And that is the real profound breach of international law, that this rules-based international approach has been breached by Russia, because it contains very important principles like the non-use of force, that it's absolutely forbidden except for self-defense, to use, and some very specific other exceptions, to use force in international relations, even the threat of force in international relations. It's a principle of territorial integrity, that you have to respect the territorial integrity of a country, and that it is absolutely forbidden to simply grab some territory parts or even the whole territory of another state in order to put it to their own state. It's the principle of non-intervention, that you are not obliged to intervene in the internal affairs of another country, of course. And it's the human rights, that human rights are universal and guaranteed for everyone. Of course, there you see that intervention and human rights, they are in a certain tension, because if you want to guarantee human rights, of course, countries is not respecting the human rights of its population. This is obviously the tension. But nevertheless, the principle that all these rules were the basis of international relations and could not be violated was accepted, or thought to be, by almost by everyone in the international community. And now this has been breached by Russia. This is really the bad thing about it. But perhaps I leave it there for the moment. We can come back to it later.
Thank you. And your remarks remind me of this topic, which is a bit more historical, but maybe Germany's role in this international rules-based order, and looking back historically, for example, at the Ostpolitik, but also in general Germany's mediator role in international politics, and also its pacifist approach to international relations. So we all know that for the longest time Germany has had this pacifist approach, also meaning less investments in military equipment and so on. Whereas now, because of the tectonic plates that have really shifted in the international world order, Germany, as many other European countries, have decided to invest heavily in military equipment and so on. What does this change for Germany's place in the world order and in the European capacity of that world order?
Yes. You mentioned rightly that we were always, and still are, one of the fiercest proponents of the rules-based international order. That's why we always were putting much emphasis on the fact that you should not conduct international relations by military means. Instead, we were convinced of a principle that you could call Wandel, in German, Wandel durch Handel, change through commerce. So that the idea that countries could approach each other through peaceful trade and therefore come closer to it than they were before, and to foster peaceful relations. And that was also the idea behind gas and other economic relations with Russia, that we thought that Russia would develop into a democratic, peaceful way by making commerce with them, by trying to, by exchanging goods and getting richer, it's mutually beneficial, and that would also influence the society in Russia to become more democratic, liberal, free. But the problem is that if you have an autocratic society, it's not in the interest of the autocrat to have a free society. Indeed, it's a big danger for them, because it threatens the power of this autocrat, and therefore they are not playing by the same rules. They're not playing by the rules of a free exchange, like that you are trading only according to market rules in order to have a rightful exchange, but they are using the power, the economic power, in order to exert political pressure in a sense that is not compatible with international law. And that's why what happened, we were convinced that Russia would be a loyal trading partner for gas, for instance, but unfortunately we have been proven wrong. It has become obvious that Russia is trying to use energy relations in order to help their goals, which go against public international law. And therefore, now we have to become energy independent from Russia. That is a very important goal. And our finance minister, Mr. Lindner, he has coined the phrase of renewable energies being freedom energies, because so we can get free from the influence of an autocratic regime on our system. And that's why we need so urgently to become independent, because we have to be aware, of course, that Russia can at any moment cut down the energy supply, the gas supply from their side. It's obvious. You see at the moment there are reductions in the delivery through the existing pipeline, Nord Stream 1. Of course, Russia can theoretically close it at any moment, and we have to be prepared for that. That's why we have now, in the short term, we are seeking alternative sources, like for instance LNG. We are building LNG terminals. We are using a little bit more coal for the moment, which is unfortunately not a good thing for the climate, but which is the only way to get independent from Russian gas in very short time, because we thought that we would have 20 or 30 years to get independent from gas use, but now we have much less time. And in the long run, the solution will be the renewable energies. That's why we anyway will never go back to the energy relations with Russia that we had before, because when this situation is over, for what reason and in what direction ever, I'm not speculating on this, then we will not need any more the fossil energy, because we will having made, I hope, the transition to renewable energies.
So what I'm hearing, Ambassador, is we will never go back to that relation and energy dependency. So is the era of the term that you mentioned before, so we trade, and through trade we create peace, we create interdependence, is that an era that is gone for good, or will we ever go back to that? Because it is, as you also mentioned, one of the foundations of maybe Western policy, but especially German, since it has played historically also this mediator role towards Eastern countries. So is that era gone for good?
I wouldn't call it an error as such, because the principle of transformation through commerce is not in such an error, but indeed one has to be more careful on how to apply it. It has been, it's a good principle, but in this case it has been wrongly applied, because we didn't see in time the warning signs. The Russian policy is not on that path only since the 24th of February 2022. That was the last step and the most obvious one. But it started already in 2008 with the invasion of Georgia, parts of Georgia. I read the Georgian ambassador here. So this, in fact, was the first real infringement, not a breach, blatant breach of international law, which where we should have been more aware. Then, of course, there was the invasion of Crimea and the eastern part of Ukraine in 2014. So probably the error in hindsight, we didn't know it at the time, but in hindsight was not to have reacted already at these times more forcefully, and to say, to really remind of the necessity to respect the rules-based international order, and especially the absolute interdiction of the use of force in international law.
Yes, and you mentioned, so this energy independence, but also it's not necessarily an area that's gone for good, but at least it's a changed world order. Then I'm wondering, in terms of Germany's role in the European Union, since it has historically and still is playing a central role, there has been coined this idea of strategic autonomy, and it has been largely discussed in the different communities around Europe, and also in Denmark, since we just had this referendum on the defense opt-out, and that was also a large area of discussion. So I'm wondering, what is Germany's take and hopes for that discussion on strategic autonomy, and what does the term mean for Germany? Because the French and the German vision is not necessarily the same, since it has been coined in different ways.
Yes, so in fact there's also the term of European sovereignty, which is, some prefer the term strategic autonomy, others rather European sovereignty. The idea is more or less the same. The idea is that we as Europeans, we have to take our destiny in our own hands and avoid dependency altogether. It's not the interaction that is bad, well, to the contrary. Interaction, globalization as such is a very good thing. But what is bad, of course, is dependency. So there are two questions. The first one is why Europe and not nation states? I mean, you could say the German or the Danish or the Luxembourg independence in the world. Well, the reason is that all nation states in Europe are historically rather small countries, and even Germany with its 82 million inhabitants, if you compare it to the continental powers in the world, and that if we were to act as individual nation states, European size nation states, then we would have no influence in the world. I mean, that's the dream of autocratic regimes, to divide us and to make it so that each and everyone acts only on its own, and but it's our European interest, or our interest as citizens of all the nation states in Europe, to act in a European manner, under a European umbrella, because only then have we the power to set the rules. If Germany alone or Luxembourg alone would be negotiating a trade treaty with some country in the world, the leverage would be very limited. Whereas if Europe, the EU, is negotiating that treaty, they have an important leverage, and even the most powerful countries in the world have to make concessions. So that's the reason why Europe should do it. And the second question is, what does sovereignty in that sense mean? So it does not mean complete independence in the sense that we do not interact with other parts of the world. So it would be, for instance, wrong to speak of the end of globalization. That's not at all what we want, and we are convinced that it would not be good, neither for us ourselves nor for anyone else in the world, to have an end to globalization. But what we need is to have a globalization that is more thoughtful. And there I come back to this difficulty of interaction between democracies and autocracies. It's not so that there shouldn't be interaction. We have to have interaction, for instance, with China, but we have to be aware that autocracies are playing according to another rule book than our rule book. They have fundamentally other interests, they have other methods, and that means that also the companies in these countries might play according to different rules. For instance, it is not possible for a company in such a country, an autocratic country, to keep information they have, for instance, information data on consumers that they are buying, clients, to keep that secret from the state power. And the state power in an autocratic regime might well use these data to a purpose that is against human rights, for instance. So we have to be aware of this risk, and we have to reflect how to address this risk. To what extent can we still work together with this country, having in mind that all the data that we are giving there might be misused for real violations of human rights. And therefore, it will be a different kind of globalization. I hope still a relatively intense globalization, because cooperation is mutually beneficial also economically. So it would be very costly and therefore detrimental for all of us to end cooperation. But it has to be a cooperation that is based on the protection of the human rights in this case, which unfortunately is not secured in many countries of this world.
And indeed, this relation to other countries, whether it be trade agreements or investments, is extremely difficult when it comes to values, because there's two approaches. There's the pragmatic approach of, well, we need to trade and we believe in interdependence, and in that way we can spread our values, or we believe in upholding our values to the very least, even if it means no trade and isolation. But then I'm wondering, in other areas of the world, I hope kids will hear me. For example, if we look at the African continent, we know that China is heavily investing through its Belt and Road Initiative. How do we ensure that Europe and the EU can play a role there? Because we know that we're already so behind, we can be frank. But then, if we are to spread our values and our democratic systems in other parts of the world, since Europe is tiny and is shrinking as well population-wise, are we not too late already?
No, we are not too late. We might indeed be behind on certain aspects, so we have to speed up. We have to really become more active and do much more in that area. But we have to be active and to go actively towards those countries and towards those societies especially, because that's the only way, first of all, to do business, and it's mutually beneficial, but also, as you said, to spread the values. And it's not our values. I'm a little bit cautious with that, because human rights are universal, so they are recognized as being universal. So you cannot say that it's Western values that we want to spread, but we want to spread universal human rights. And the fact, for instance, that every individual has the right to decide by himself, has the right to criticize his government, and things like that. But it's true that it's an uphill battle, because in many countries the problem is that the ruling fractions feel threatened by human rights. I mean, human rights are a threat to every autocrat. That's why the autocratic regimes try to limit human rights, or even to violate human rights, because they feel, and they're right to feel so threatened by the very existence of them, and the fact that individual citizens are living according to their human rights. So there will be always efforts by important and powerful actors to try to limit the exercise of human rights, and thereby also to limit the influence of democracies. But nevertheless, we have to find a way of doing it together in a way. See the example of China. There you have, in fact, China. There are three aspects in our relation to China. China is on one side an indispensable partner, like for instance in the fight against climate change. You cannot have an efficient fight against climate change without including China. It's secondly a competitor on economic issues, and it's good to have a competitor. Competition in economy is good, that's a good thing. So we are glad to have a competitor. But thirdly, it's also a strategic rival who wants to attain a goal that is radically different from the image of society that we have. And these three aspects, you have to bring them together. I mean, to take account of all of these three aspects in order to devise your policy. So it would be fundamentally wrong to just severe relations and not do any business at all. And it's not possible, and that's not the right thing to do. Because, as I said, it's an indispensable partner and a very valuable competitor. But on the other hand, we cannot simply open our markets completely without any control, because it's also a strategic, systemic rival. and especially it's playing by other rules than our rules. It's not the companies, Chinese companies, are not only playing by market economy rules, but behind there's always the influence of the state, and they are always liable to state entities, and therefore we have influences and ways of acting that are not compatible with free market economy trading. So, and that's the picture, and there you have to find then a solution that combines all these elements.
Yeah, and that is a very difficult solution and complex as well, because we also see the United States, who is also a partner, more so than China, of course, since it is also a democracy. But the question is also, when the US is slowly turning away from Europe with this interest and towards China, will Europe and the EU have to create an independent position on countries like China, or will we always be in line with the United States, because they're not necessarily the same interests?
Yes, of course, we have to be to have our own position, but I assume that this position will not be very different from the United States, because as you see, as you said, the United States, of course, are a democracy. They share the same value base. But yeah, I mean, of course, there's a difference between Europe and the United States. That's why the Europeans have to develop their own set of rules, their own European sovereignty, as we were speaking before, but not in contradiction or in opposition to the United States, but in cooperation.
Absolutely. I would like to turn to a slightly different topic, but still within European sovereignty and policies, and that is the topic of migration from a European perspective. Because we all know with the climate crisis and increasing this instability in the world, migration is not something that is going to stop. And unfortunately, it is not just because of wars, it is because of economic insecurity, because of climate disasters and so on. And we all know that in the years 15 and 16, well, the whole European system collapsed. And unfortunately, we have not been able to create a more functioning system since. Although now with the Ukrainian refugees, we have seen a whole historic, actually, kind of solidarity between European countries and making those procedures work better. So the question is, and I'm also referring to a conversation I had with Boris Pistorius, who was in Copenhagen in May. Boris Pistorius, so the Minister of Interior in Lower Saxony, and we were discussing European migration policy and what ways forward. And that was more in relation to Denmark. But I'm wondering, what is the German stance on revising the European system for asylum and refugees, since it is at least not entirely functioning? I think we can probably agree on that. What would be the German take on that? Because the negotiations are happening, but very slowly.
Yes, indeed. So our position is that we need a European system there as well, and a well-functioning European system, which indeed we do not have at the moment. So there is room for improvement, and that's what we are working on. But of course, there's a fundamental difficulty that you have behind this policy area, because as I said before, we have this value-based approach that we base all our actions and all our being on the respect for human rights. So we have also to respect the human rights of the refugees, to help them if they're in need. We cannot have a policy that would deny their human rights or would endanger their protection. But on the other hand, of course, there are limited resources, so that's the dilemma in which we are, and we have to find a way that ensures the dignity, the human dignity and the human rights of the refugees, which are the paramount issue. But on the other hand, of course, can be also put into practice, and we have to see the limitations that exist in our societies, so we have to find a solution. but on European level, if possible, that should be the goal, because we have this free area in Europe, and we would endanger it if we would have national solutions.
Absolutely, and indeed that solution is complex, but will hopefully be start being negotiated in the near future, also seeing in the context of the Ukrainian war. Then here at the end, I would like to maybe pose a bit of a grand geopolitical question, which might be hard to answer, but I'm sure that we can have a discussion. So my question would be, you mentioned human rights and these universal values, and there has been this eternal debate on what are universal values, because of course from our stance, from Denmark's, from Germany's, and from the European and many other countries in the world stance, these rights are universal. But on the other hand, we also, if we look at the demographics of the world and the number of people in countries living under governments that are autocratic, as you mentioned, and do not uphold these values and rights, are we entitled to pursue and say that these rights or universal values, for example, in the community of the United Nations or in the Security Council, are we kind of behind? Should we also let other countries be at the negotiating table more? Or is this, because I'm thinking from other perspectives, it might seem that we are trying to impose other things on countries that are geographically and demographically speaking are much bigger than our regions.
No, we are not imposing anything on other countries. As I said, the human rights are universal by nature. They are not attributed by a state or attributed by a democratic process. They exist as such. Like, for instance, the right to life, the right to personal integrity. All these rights, they are enshrined in the human nature and not attributed by a state or international organization. And I think they are in the interest of every individual worldwide. If you ask an individual person anywhere in the world whether he considers that he himself has the right to live, for instance, he will always say yes. But the problem is that there are autocratic power structures that feel threatened by that, because the human rights are empowering the individual and are therefore strengthening power structures that are vertical from above. And so these groups, these power structures, will try to delegitimize human rights. That's the problem we are facing, but not the fact that we are imposing values or requests on other cultures.
Yes, thank you. So indeed, the universal rights are universal, and it is an ongoing discussion, but we do believe that, and we have to work towards that.
Yes.
So let's just backtrack towards what we talked about in the beginning, since we're in Denmark. Let's go back to that and end on that note. So we've talked about geopolitical, strategic policies of the European Union, of Germany, which plays a leading role in our very unique community. From the perspective of Germany, where do you see Denmark playing either different or bigger or smaller role in those areas? Because as we know with Brexit and other changes in the world, well, there is some kind of a vacuum.
Yes.
And are there countries such as Denmark or others that Germany would like to see play a different role in promoting those values, in promoting that strategic autonomy and all the other issues?
Yes. So the Prime Minister of Denmark said that she wanted Denmark to be at the heart of Europe, and yeah, I think that's indeed where Denmark belongs to. And we are very glad that this is obviously a Danish desire to be at the heart of Europe. It has been underlined by the decision of the Danish people to get rid of the defense exemption and to participate fully in the common foreign and security policy, especially the security and defense policy. And therefore, I think this is a very good development, and that's what we want
that will conclude our session on Germany and Europe's role in the new geopolitical globalized world, which is changing day by day. We of course hope that Germany and Denmark, with its historical ties and this new deal, will continue to cooperate and to see